Welcome back. We have a very special youngest before it was fashionable to go to every country in the world traveler, Maurizio Giuliano. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here.
One thing, our birthdays are not so far apart, but I got a much later start in my travels. So I have that envy, and I also picked out how a bunch of your early travels were visiting pen pals, which may seem antiquated to the current audience, but it's really just taken a different form. So talk about how you made connections when it wasn't so easy to be communicating around the world.
Well, thanks a lot, Stefan. I mean, I like to think that that was the original way of couch surfing, because after all, couch surfing was born from the idea that you meet people along the way or pen pals in advance, and then you crash on their couch.
Mm.
And well, when I was already like 14, 15, I was fascinated by the world. And I started writing. I don't remember the details, but I was in touch with embassies, organization, friendship associations in different parts of the world, and managed to connect with essentially kids, people my age, 15, 16 from those countries. And of course, when they wrote back, a letter can take 2 weeks, maybe a month. When they wrote back and say, "Oh yeah, if you want to come to my country, you're welcome," and when I would write back and say, "Hey, actually, yes, I can come next summer," it would be like, "Really? Yes, why not?" So when I was 14, I went for the first time to the Soviet Union to see a girl that I met as a pen pal. When I was 16, I went to Chile to see another girl that I met as a pen pal, and crashed in their couch or spare room at that time. And it was quite a great way to make connections, really.
I'm curious. I mean, envy that opportunity to visit the Soviet Union at that time. Travelers of a younger generation say like the closest you can approximate it is to go to Transnistria these days. How
Yeah.
how relevant is that?
I mean, I have a rather funny story about Transnistria, again, showing the lack of, information was not so easy to research. So around, I don't know, but somewhere near year 2000,
Mm-hmm.
when the internet was still quite primitive, I went to the south of Ukraine, and then I decided to hire a car with a driver and drive to Moldova. And even though I had studied the situation in Transnistria in my studies and all that, at one point we drive from Ukraine. I expect to find the Moldovan border, and I find the Russian soldiers. So that is confusing. Where am I? So even someone like me, who was rather expert on the globe, I honestly did not expect to find Russian soldiers there. That was the checkpoint to get into Transnistria, and that tells a bit to how difficult indeed it was to research places. But it was indeed fascinating to be in the Soviet Union. Something, as you say, only you can now today find Transnistria, maybe Artsakh, Moldova. Sorry, Moldova. I mean Abkhazia, and yeah.
It's such a complex part of the world. I think any of us travelers visiting, and we're not quite sure what's going to turn up. And I guess nothing is surprising, but everything is surprising. Yeah. You mentioned also that you were contacting different international friendship organizations and that, and I feel like maybe that's something that has been lost a little bit in the awareness of some of the young travelers. I mean, all over the world, you've got these Goethe societies for Germany. You've got Alliance Française. You've got consulates, especially in smaller countries. You have consulates that, while if they're in Washington or London, might be heavily armed and fortified. If it's in a Pacific nation, you might be able to pretty much walk in and go to their social evening. So, to talk a little bit about what international organizations, structures are out there that you think, for people that only live on Facebook and Instagram, they should also consider interacting with.
Well, I was going to actually say that in a world that is so interconnected and digitalized, it does actually make sense, fortunately or unfortunately, depending which way you look at it, that you don't need a friendship association to make friends on the other side of the world. You find friends, connections anywhere in the world, whether you look for it or not. We are all in all sorts of Facebook groups, including our group, and And yes, and there are people from everywhere, and that applies also to less traveled people who might be sharing interests or so on. I do think that the traditional associations, the British Councils, Alliance Française, Goethe Institute, and so on, can still play a role. I'm not really able to comment on what role they should play in today's world, but I think that uh, there is still, I don't know, I won't get into the details, but I think that there is still a role that this can play, and encourage the friendships which may already be forming in online fora of different sorts.
Since we're on the young people theme, and this year has disrupted the plans of so many young people, travel, different study abroad, these things. You've had a career that has involved journalism, that has involved the international development world. Make the pitch for the young person who feels like the doors are all locked now, and maybe feeling a bit discouraged, but wants say this journalism life, this international development life, in the footsteps that you've had.
Well, I think, to be really honest, journalism, I've always liked writing. I've always liked connecting with people. So for me, journalism was a bit of a pretext to travel and to connect with people, to be able to go to someone I was interested in and say, hey, I'm interviewing you. And usually I was publishing that as well. I wasn't just doing it for myself, but of course it was great to be doing something. Also because in some places, when you go to Afghanistan at age, I think 26 or so, or when you go to East Timor, it may be unusual for someone to say, hey, what are you doing here? Because everyone is, oh, I'm here with Organization X, Organization Y, and say, oh, I'm here just because I'm bumming around and backpacking. It looks odd. So being a journalist was not only a way to make a little bit of money, and of course to implement my passion of writing, but also to give a meaning to my trips that not only I could understand, but also the other people could understand. So my pitch to young people is that the world is there. Borders may be locked temporarily, not even all of them. And I think that getting to know the world, the way in which people live and think around the world, which may be among them a lot more similar than they were 20, 30 years ago, is still something that is essential. I don't think that it's certainly a plus, but I also think it's essential in today's world. We face in today's world a number of situations like migration, transborder movements of different sorts, and we live in societies that are more and more and more globalized socially, economically, and I think that it is essential for everyone to see for themselves other countries, which may be or may not be similar to the ones that they're used to. So I think that is essential. In the same way that people would say 30 years ago, oh, you must learn English if you want to get somewhere in the world, I would say, young people, you must really get out and see the world if you want to be successful in this world which is globalized.
Excellent. And how does one? I think we've encountered on the road the diplomat, the aid worker that's been doing it for a couple decades and feels disenchanted and a bit jaded. How to keep that positive hope going again in a year that feels so downbeat in so many ways. And if someone's interested in that career of we'll call it international public service, whatever form that may take, charity work, international organizations, how to build your career and keep going, keep it fresh, so you don't become the jaded, cynical type that you sometimes meet at the corner of the bar.
Well, I think that people should do what their passion is. No career is better than another. Some people may want to go into development. Some people may want to go into journalism, into the private sector, into insurance, or anything. And I think that my comment applies equally to all those. Whether you're a cook, whether you are a business person, traveling is essential. I mean, today, let's think of the simple thing about food. It is less and less likely to find a cook who says, oh, I only know how to cook Italian food.
Mm.
because food is becoming so globalized as well.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
everyone knows I think every good cook, every good restaurant should have a bit of an understanding of different traditions, different ways of eating. So, whatever your field, I think that traveling and knowing this beautiful planet that we live in is absolutely crucial. Being disenchanted, I think it can be easy to get disenchanted in general, not career-wise, but in general about a world where climate change, plastic pollution, terrorism are threatening our very existence. And I'd like to look at it the positive way,
Mhm.
that there is so much solidarity.
Mhm.
And if you go to some places, some very, very actually share with others, actually support others. And I think that we can learn a lot from people who live a simple life in some parts of the world on their spontaneous generosity and desire to help others. Because I do think that solidarity is innate in humans. I do think that we all have an innate desire to help one another and help humanity.
Oh, that's wonderfully said. You mentioned Democratic Republic of Congo, and that's one that I feel even amongst very active, experienced travelers, there's a number that it's either a quick city visit in Kinshasa, or it's a Virunga trip, or one of the other parks to see the gorillas. And there's only a subset of people that go beyond that. I confess I've been to Virunga across the border from Rwanda, and not anywhere else in the country. Tell us about DRC.
I think it is understandable that most people will go to Kinshasa or and to the Great Lakes region. Goma, Bukavu, which are absolutely beautiful. The scenery, the lakes,
Mm-hmm.
are absolutely fantastic. I think what is also fascinating about the Congo is the forest. I was at one point living in that country, and you can literally take a small plane from one place to another. These beautiful non-pressurized propeller aircraft that fly at 1 or 2,000 meters
Mm-hmm.
above the surface, and you literally see forest non-stop for over an hour. And I haven't been able to go too deep into the forest, but just being on the outskirts of the forest, going to small villages, it's a very enriching experience. As I said, we see humanity maybe, I don't know, I could say in one of its purest forms. And of course, the Congo is not only beautiful scenery; it's the people, their music, their food, their traditions.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest anyone going to the Congo to, yes, go to Bukavu, spend some time at the Orchid Hotel, go to see the gorillas. But if you have time, just go somewhere safe, if possible, somewhere random in Eastern Congo, and see the beauty of pristine villages on small courses of water, and interact with people. That's one of the most beautiful things about traveling, interacting with people of all sorts.
Sounds fantastic. The safety question always comes up. You said find someone safe, somewhere safe if possible. How would someone with no experience in Central Africa make that research and determination these days?
I think that between the online forum that you have and the groups that you have, as long as people have their own criteria, their own understanding to be able to assess different sources, and of course, as long as people are cautious, because you have to be cautious, I think that people have a number of sources. And of course, once you get somewhere, talk to people and find out. I once hosted an Italian traveler who is in our groups too, when I was living in Bamako in Mali, and he was planning to make his way by road to Timbuktu.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one case when I said, well, no, that is not a good idea. There are other places in Mali that you can go to in a rather, in a sufficient safe place. I definitely must advise you strongly not to go to Timbuktu. So I think that as long as you keep your ears open and talk to people, you will most likely not go off the right track. Now, you never know, and I think that being cautious is always the norm when visiting certain places.
Excellent, well said. And it sounds like Mali is a passion of yours as well. Tell us about the
Also,
country.
yes.
Tell us
Sorry.
about tell us about your Mali experience.
I mean, I lived in Mali for I think just under a year. I was twice in Timbuktu,
Mm,
twice in Mopti,
mm,
and those places are fascinating. There is something mystical about Timbuktu. I guess for many of us, the name Timbuktu actually does sound mystical already.
mhm,
Some
mhm,
people in some languages, Timbuktu is synonymous with the end of the world, somewhere really remote.
mm.
It is actually a fantastic place. When you see the mosque made of what was the word? Clay? Not clay. Sorry. I'm forgetting the word of what the mosque in Timbuktu and Jenna are made of, but not that I remember in any other language. But
I've
when
heard
you
it
see,
referred to as mud, but maybe that's not the right term
well,
either.
yeah, it is a sort of mad, but we can't call
Yeah,
it mad because it has a
yeah,
real name, which I'm just
yeah.
forgetting now. But I'm thinking that these have been kept because, of course, this material actually gets damaged very easily, and they've been kept like that for centuries. I mean, they're absolutely fantastic. And then you see the museums where they have old manuscripts, which is fantastic too. And it's also a bit worrying because most of them have not been digitized. You know,
Mhm,
think a fire, another attack like the ones that Mali experienced earlier this decade,
mhm.
can actually destroy knowledge which has been there, untouched almost, and not to studied for hundreds of years. So, going to Timbuktu is something that, if it were a safe thing to do, which at the moment I believe is not, in my opinion, is something that I think travelers should be looking forward to. There was actually a group. I don't think the group has a name, but some of our colleagues, sorry, colleagues, our friends in these groups, in these circles that have been to Timbuktu by chartering a plane and security. Actually, through a friend of mine who is a souvenir seller slash postcard project person in Mali, and they were actually able to go taking all precautions in touch with the government and all that as tourists, and actually that's something that can be done, but it's actually extremely expensive to do it. So yeah,
Yeah, I saw that trip. The Nomad Mania people
Nomad Mania, right? Yeah, that's
organized it, and I was envious of it. But it wasn't in the cards for what I had available resource time wise for that. But I was seeing the lavish pictures. I mean, really incredible. And you mentioned these connections to cultures. I thought back, and I'll share in the show notes. The Economist Christmas specials in 2015 wrote about how Catholic monks in my home state of Minnesota in the U.S. were preserving and digitizing these texts smuggled out of Timbuktu to preserve them digitally because of the risk and this incredible cross faith effort to retain this knowledge. You mentioned living in Mali for about a year. Could you give us a breakdown of all the places you've lived and the lengths you've lived in them?
oh, okay. Yes. Well, when I was well, I took a gap year, so I don't know what you mean by living. Whether it means 2 months or 2 years, but I took one
Well,
gap year.
that's a bit where I wanted to go because I feel like
Yeah,
it's gotten very popular. I mean, setting aside 2020 disruptions, the broadly under this digital nomad idea of spending, say, 2 months, 3 months, and I feel like maybe the 1 to 2 year stint is getting a little less common for that crowd,
yeah,
and yet my own, and I really only have one substantial. I lived in China for just about a decade, and I felt
oh,
like 2 years was really the point where I really had to function locally. You can't rely on your crutch of everything, your phone roaming or, from
yeah, of
home
course.
data. So I'm just curious these lengths of durations and what you've taken from them.
I mean, I've lived for. I mean, before working, when I was studying, I've spent long amounts of time in Cuba. I actually wrote 2 books about Cuba. So I was there like 2 months at a time, 1 month, 3 months, probably 1 year cumulatively. It was, and it still is, of course, a fascinating place. I spent long periods of time in Indonesia and Chile. I was affiliated with an academic think tank in Chile at the time. Well, I lived, of course, in the UK when I was studying there. I lived in Italy when I was living there. Then, when I started to work more substantively, I lived for several months each in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and then Timor-Leste before that, East Timor.
Mhm.
And then I lived for 1 year or more, or almost a year, in Central African Republic,
Mm.
Sudan and South Sudan before independence, Chad, DR Congo, Mali, Mexico, Brazil. I don't know if I'm forgetting something. And now I'm based in New York. So
Well, New York
not
may
bad.
be a foreign land to many of us now. What is New
Right,
York in 2020 like, given all the places you've lived and the changes that we've had this year?
right. There are no questions from our friends there. No, I don't see any questions being asked.
Sometimes they're quiet and listen along. A lot of times questions come actually after on replay that people are watching. So don't worry about that. Don't be offended.
No, no.
It's,
Okay.
well, we'll make sure to have you chiming in on replies in the follow up. But I feel like people are moving around now, so more and more are watching these on the replay, and that's why we've got both the Facebook and YouTube to make it convenient. People are getting back. Speaking of getting back, you've been moving about for work necessity, as well as I believe some amount of leisure travel the past few months. What have been your experiences?
Excuse me. In the past
What
few
have
months, well,
been your
the last
travel experiences the past few months?
well, not much. I was mainly in. I spent most of the lockdown periods between Switzerland and Italy.
Mhm.
The last really exciting trip I did was to Santa Lina and Ascension in February. It was quite interesting because I found myself. I arrived in Santa Lina.
Mhm.
So in March, actually. I was in New York, and this trip has been planned for a very long time. You can only get to Ascension once a month, at which point you can either spend 24 hours there or 1 month there. So I went for the 24 hours option.
Mhm.
And I decided no. I'm going to go anyway because I planned it months ago, and the borders are not closed yet. Let's see what happens. And so I went successfully to Ascension for 24 hours, and then on the way back, after 2 days in Santa Lina, I get a letter saying that I have to self quarantine or self isolate because I had been on a flight with there were some suspected cases, which is quite interesting because out of 6 nights in Santa Lina, I was self isolating for two. But
Mhm.
it was fun. I managed to see the most of the island. And it's one place where even though I was on my own, I didn't get bored or anything.
Mhm.
Fantastic, fantastic culture, fantastic places, both human-made and natural. And yeah, it was pretty exciting. I love going to islands. Not all of them are easy to get to. Um, the only place more isolated than Sant'Elena I've been to in terms of uh, territories or countries that are islands, I think, is Tokelau.
Mhm.
Um, I went there as part of, I wasn't traveling just to tick the box. So I traveled to places where they were, on a territory, so not Tokelau back at that time, I think in 2001 or so.
Oh wow.
It was really hard to get to. There was no internet. You couldn't just Google go to Tokelau. So it was all about calling the New Zealand embassies and Tokelau liaison offices and things like that, and finally finding out that there is a boat going to Tokelau once a month from I'm not sure, was it from? It was not from Sub. I think it was from Apia in Samoa,
Mhm.
and then talking to the people there. Who trusted you? Oh no! Don't send payment. Just bring the money with you. It's not a problem. And getting there. Months and months of planning. Now things are getting easy. Now you can go to Pitcairn almost every week. Except for now during the pandemic, you just book a few weeks in advance. You show up in a Paperia Mangareva and you go, which is something which is on the top of my list. As soon as I have 2 weeks, 2 weeks available and a little bit of money.
Mhm.
At that time, traveling was a whole different story in terms of the visas that you had to get, in terms of um, the fact that there were not so many flights, let alone so many boats to remote places, in terms of the research you had to do, in terms of the contacts, if you didn't have much money, contacts so that you could stay in someone's home for free and not having to pay for a hotel or hostel. It was a whole different challenge,
Mhm.
and that's why I'm very happy that my record was since broken. by James Asquith and more people after him,
Mhm.
which is great. Miracles are that to be broken. But I can tell you, in that time, I would say, between that and my journalism, it was a full-time job. I mean, researching, getting visas, getting a bit of money, of course, to actually be able to do the thing. I mean, it was a full-time job for a few years, and quite exciting as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tokelau is. I mean, it's easier in a sense, but it's still. I heard David Langan of Ireland talk about all the efforts to go just in the past couple of years. It seems like if people want a taste of what you were dealing with much of the world 20 years ago, that Tokelau is a place to see just how, I think travelers, it's like it almost doesn't exist if a country is not so online. It's like, if the flight isn't on Expedia, then it doesn't exist. But
Yeah.
like St. Helena, that's on an Ascension, that's on a charter basis. You actually have to contact a human and do that. I'm envious about Ascension. So St. Helena, absolutely second. I mean, incredible, and the natural variety that you mentioned surprised me as well. I've not yet been to Ascension. I was hoping for the Airlink to resume, and
It will resume, I think. Yeah, it's supposed to resume the South Atlantic Air Bridge.
They keep saying like another year, right? Or is it firmer now? I haven't followed it recently.
I mean, having talked to people there just in March, the hopes, the expectation is that it will resume relatively soon. It could be 1 or 2 years. I don't know. I mean, I took the South Atlantic. I mean, it was to my disappointment, even though I can say, you can research things very easily. About 3 years ago, I was going to the Falklands, and I said, well, that's where I'm going to hit Ascension as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't. I didn't know it was going via Cape Verde. And but even better, Santa Lita I was going to go to anyway, so I did that in those two in one go. So someone says greetings to both. Okay, didn't ask any question. Greetings to you too.
Yes, the fans are watching. They're out there. They're just sometimes quieter. Talk about 24 hours in Ascension. It's
like 24 hours. Yeah. I mean, I obviously had alerted. I mean, people knew it was coming, and you don't get tourists there very much. Just 1 month before I did that, what's his name? The guy from New Zealand, Tudor, went there to do the exact same thing that I did 1 month before. So when I was writing to people, I say, "Hey, I'm coming there for 24 hours." And you say, "Oh, what are you coming to do here?" I say, "Well, same that Tudor did, just see as much as possible of the place within 24 hours." So the airport lady on arrival rushed me through. I didn't ask for it, but there were lots of people. Hey, excuse me, he's only staying for 24 hours. Can we come through, please? So he rushed me out. The lady from the guest was there, rushed me to the guest house to leave my stuff, and her husband drove me around to the hills, to the forts. I think there were 2 or 3 forts. And between Ascension and Santa Helena, I took about 950 photos, which are all on my Facebook. They're supposed to be public, and I can't remember the exact things. I saw some land crabs, and after that, after seeing as much as possible of with the husband in the afternoon, I went to hang around in a bar where the American military hang around. There are not so many of them at the moment. Then I went to one club, then to another. It was a big party night, not only because it was Saturday, but because it was the night that the plane had come, and people had a lot of people had just arrived the day before. I mean, the same day, or they were leaving the next day. So there were lots of farewells and welcomes and all that. So I spent the night in a couple of places where people were eating freshly caught fish, and then I went to sleep rather early. Or rather, no, I didn't. I guess I didn't sleep much because I woke up at about 4 o'clock to go and see the turtles, the famous turtles that it was the nesting season. So the turtles that have come from Brazil, and you literally see them waking up at that time in the morning and making their way slowly. Well, not so slowly, I mean, to the sea. And so I watched a beautiful sunrise together with the turtles. I mean, by the time the sun was up, actually the turtles were actually back in the sea. Then I walked around. Then I did my usual thing, going to the souvenir shop, which is actually the only shop in the island that they sell souvenirs too. My wife is always thrilled when I bring souvenirs back to our home in Geneva. and I sent postcards, which by the way have not arrived yet. Well, of course, I mean the plane didn't go for months,
Yeah.
so the postcards from Santa Lina are just arriving now, and the one from Asensio have not arrived yet. Then I did another tour to see, I guess, one fort and the museum that were missing, and then was taken back to the airport, the airstrip airport. Yeah, yeah.
Well, as I said, I'm envious. I held out. I was on the RMS. I got to go to Tristan. I got to go to.
You were on the RMS.
I did not add the extra.
Well, that's one of the things I would have liked to do, to be on the RMS Santa Lina in one of the last journeys. Unfortunately, that's the age of Royal Mail ships are kind of gone. But that's something I would have loved to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I know you've got your extreme travel group, and you've been working on trips to Tristan. You've been working on trips to British Indian Ocean territory. What have you learned so far in this planning process about chartering a ship to go somewhere very remote?
I learned that there are many takers in principle, but of course there are two obstacles. One obstacle is that to go to Tristan, honestly, you need about 3 weeks, including the flight to Cape Town and back, unless you live in South Africa. I mean, and it would be very hard for the takers to be available at the same time to do it. And also, the prices are actually very high, which is unfortunate because either you spend $500 for a bunk bed, which is fine, but many of us are not willing to spend 5 days in a bunk bed just to go to Tristan. And the other problem is that, of course, you don't know if you're going to be offloaded at the last moment. You might get to Cape Town, and at the last moment they say, sorry, you cannot get on because there is an emergency or something. And you might get to Tristan, and you don't know if you're going to stay 3 nights or actually 1 week, including the time to actually get offshore if the weather is bad. And if either you do that or you spend $17,000 for a cruise, which is insane, of course, and you're not even guaranteed to have a landing on Tristan. So I think the only way to go to Tristan, in the way that most of us want to go to Tristan, is probably to charter something. But so far, the people I've spoken to, the prices seem quite prohibitive. If anyone on the group wants to get in touch with me and give me a hand trying to find something that makes sense to most people, I mean, of course, you're very welcome. I don't know myself when I'm going to have 3 weeks for that either, but at some point, hopefully.
I see. And how about British? Yeah, and British Indian Ocean territory. It's even more expensive. Tell us why would it's like you ask the people climbing the mountain because it's there, but tell us specifically what is the territory and what is the draw.
Well, I mean, to be really honest with you, I definitely want to go to Tristan because it is the most isolated territory that has its own inhabitants. It is an island with 500 people living there who have been there for centuries. And I want to go to Tristan for the same reasons that I want to go to Pitcairn. Now, the situation is obviously very different for Biot, British Indian Ocean territories. It does not have its own inhabitants. Its own inhabitants are, unfortunately, as we all know, not there. So it's not on top of my list. It is actually another colleague, another traveler on the group that started a thread, and I think that's great. I wouldn't mind going there, but it's really not at the top of my list. I think that it'd be great to tick off the thing, and it'd be great to see the beautiful natural life, but it's also very sad that the people who are supposed to be living in Chagos are not able to live in Chagos. So it wouldn't be on top of my list to go to a place that even the people who should live there, unfortunately, do not live there. So I have several other places on my wish list before that.
It seemed like this was with David Cameron's time before the Brexit vote. It seemed like there was movement that there might be an opening to get some of the islanders the option.
I don't know. I won't comment on anything political.
Okay.
We just know the Chagostians are not in Chagos. That's all we know. And
yeah. I tried to follow, and I follow British news to a degree and haven't heard. It seems to have been swept away in so much of the other focus they've had. We've got a question about Falklands. You mentioned the Falklands.
Oh, yes.
Itinerary, number of days.
Well, it depends what you want to do. In my case, it was very unfortunate because I went with the South Atlantic Air Bridge, and the way that the flights were working between the air bridge and LATAM to fly from there on to Chile. Well,
Hmm.
what I did is that I was living in Brazil, so in one of my regular travels to go back from Europe back to Brazil, I
Hmm.
said, well, instead of taking the usual airlines, let's go via London,
Hmm.
Oxford, where I studied, by the way, take the
Hmm.
bridge, get to the Falklands, and then fly back via Chile to Brazil. So very unfortunately, it was only 2 days, but even more unfortunate, the flight was delayed by almost 24 hours, and so
Oh.
it became a 24-hour stay. That is not what I recommend for the Falklands.
Mm.
I think that depending on your interest, I think that if you're into penguins, natural life, marine life, I think you could spend weeks in the Falklands. I
Uh-huh.
don't think it's a good idea to go to the Falklands to just see Port Stanley, although that's really beautiful, that's really charming. I would say that 3 or 4 days is probably, a reasonable length of time for most people. I would love to go back to the Falklands also because I've not been to the South Georgia Islands.
Hmm.
And at that time, I might find hopefully a cheap cruise or something that can do both. Or if we ever try to something to Tristan, then you could actually go that way. You could go from the Falklands via South Georgia to Tristan and on to South Africa in theory. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you think about getting a sense of the Atlantic Ocean. It's such a complicated. uh, yeah, and I sometimes look at the most traveled people list, and they find rocks that
Yeah.
even the experts didn't know were there, but they're trying to fling themselves onto these things.
I mean, it's certainly fascinated. I mean, there is a rock. A rock hole is a rock, as you know, that is part of Scotland.
Yeah.
It is fascinating, but I'd say that I probably wouldn't want to get deep into visiting places without without permanent inhabitants until
Hmm.
I get to see the ones with permanent inhabitants. So I've not been to Abkhazia yet. I had lunch in Berlin with Gianluca, who is very active in helping people get to Abkhazia and for the matter South Ossetia,
Hmm.
Luhansk, Donetsk, and etc. I still have never been to Tibet, quite shamefully, which is
Oh, wow.
high on my list.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, I have a long wish list of extreme, and well, Tibet not even so extreme anymore, places to get to. There's something wrote something here.
Yes. Which
Which
was your
was your
most
most dangerous
dangerous?
experience if you had? Also, how did you plan your journey decades ago? Consider internet was on its infancy and there was not. Well, I think one of the most surreal experiences. I think it was 2003 that I went to Somalia.
Hmm.
It was not as supposedly dangerous, quite dangerous as it is today, but it was still not a particularly safe place. I didn't have any kids to worry about, so I was rather careless when it came to risks related to traveling. So what I did is that in the Horn of Africa, I went from Ethiopia to Djibouti because you couldn't go to Eritrea, to Eritrea, but to Djibouti, back to Yemen, and so on. And then from Djibouti, I finally took a flight to Somalia. And believe me, I had no clue what I was going to do there or how it was going to work out. I just made sure that I have enough cash,
Mhm.
that I didn't have anything too expensive with me,
Mhm.
and I took a flight from Djibouti to Mogadishu. So that
Mm.
was quite interesting because it's also related to your second question about planning, because in that case, I had no plan. But again, as I was saying earlier, I believe in the innate good nature of people, in the innate solidarity of people. I was the only person on the flight who was not Somali or half Somali. And
Mm.
already the crew on the plane was saying, "Oh, what are you going to do in Somalia?" And when I said, "Actually, I'm just going to visit. I'm a freelance journalist. I'm just going to see what it's like. I've never been here." Well, probably they thought I was mad. They didn't tell me that, but I said, "Oh, okay. Well, no. I mean, when you arrive, we're gonna help you, put in touch with the colleagues. Let's take care of you." And absolutely. I mean, that's what humans are. Humans are naturally beings who care for one another.
Mhm.
So we land. First of all, I had told them about my passport stamp obsession. So the immigration guy, after doing everyone else, comes on board. He gives me his own stamp so I can stamp my own multiple passports. That was very kind of him.
Mm.
And then I get handed directly from the plane crew to the crew of the company.
Mm.
The airplane did not actually spend overnight in Somalia. It just came for the
No.
day from Dubai, and we get surrounded by all these guys with weapons defending the plane, and then I get sent with a plane crew to the city. It was quite scary because I was for one of the first times in my life in a convoy full of guns. At one point, they even stop for prayer, and I get a bit worried. Well, if there is a risk of attacks, why are we stopping? And is it not dangerous? I say, well, we're not going to be attacked while we pray. Okay, that's great. And then I ended up in the hotel where they told me to stay, and the hotel was actually the same hotel where half of the government was living, including the prime minister. So even though I didn't have make contact beforehand because it was very difficult, the internet was not working there, and it was very primitive anyway. I ended up for 5 days being in this hotel in the center of Mogadishu, being able to interact with the prime minister and several other people from the government, lots of other people, the Somalis working there, and so on. They themselves told me how to get out of the hotel, meaning that they would arrange for a little van with an escort to drive me around a couple of times. So it could have been very dangerous had it not been by chance in the hands of very responsible local people, and I had the chance not to avoid any danger. And internet, as you say, was in its infancy, and Lonely Planet was a great way, of course, to plan my travels. I remember getting to when I went to Tokelau, the last island at Tafu, the most remote of them. I arrived there like 11 o'clock at night, and looking at the Lonely Planet book, I say, hey, I'm looking for fisherman Faleti Lopa because it looks like he has a guest house. Oh, yeah, Faleti, sure. Where is Faleti? Oh, that's his son. Go with him. So quite interesting. Lonely Planet at that time was really a travel survivor kit, and it was impressively good. That someone had actually been to Tokelau to find out about the fisherman Faleti Lopa who had a guest house, so that they could actually someone could actually arrive and just ask for the fisherman to stay at his home. It was quite impressive. The thorn tree from Lonely Planet was thriving at that time, maybe in the early 2000s. So you could share advice there too, even though most of it was not for extreme destinations. But by and large, it was about calling embassies, trying to make friends with the people talking to you, so they wouldn't just give you the bureaucratic information about visas, but maybe give you some advice, put you in touch with local guides, and friends of friends, and so on. And there is here another. I have heard you also do. You have organized a few. I've tried to organize EPS meetings in New York. EPS members love your parties in New York. I think I only had two. Yeah, I'm back in New York. I think that we should have a physically distanced EPS meeting. I mean, I've been in touch, of course, with the most active here. Well, EPS, the different groups. I mean, there are several people who are very active on the groups. I forgot which group is which, to be honest, because the meeting is for everyone. And yeah, I mean, I think I'm all in. Facebook text me, even if we're only 2 or 3, let's meet in a park at a relevant distance or in one restaurant which is safe enough to be distant. I did actually leave my apartment because it had been empty for a few months, but I don't have a place to host them, but we can do it somewhere else. Absolutely, if you're in New York, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's all trying to find ways to interact safely, responsibly, and like every walk of life, travelers have widely varying interpretations of how to handle.
Oh, there's another question. Yeah, someone says it was way more adventurous. Well, it was definitely more adventurous. I mean, as I said, there were some. If you look at every issue that was a challenge, also had a solution. So flight tickets were more expensive, a lot more expensive than today. So what you do as a backpacker? Well, as a backpacker, you discover that if you play with frequent flyer miles in the right way, it was so good. It wasn't like today. You got miles based on distance, plenty of promotion to take advantage of. And if you knew how to play between paid tickets and the miles that you get, you actually could travel for free a lot with miles. You would discover that a round trip around the world ticket was $1,500, which was amazingly cheap. You know how to get the best fares, which was not like this complicated. It was all based on IATA rules. So without going into details, I was an expert in the TPM, MPM for those of you who know what I'm talking about. IHP were applicable, so I could actually devise my own fares, probably better than the average travel agency. And between round the world tickets, frequent flyer miles, knowing IATA rules very well, I was able to actually spend much less than people thought. You needed visas. You needed visas for when the first time I went to Poland, to Czechoslovakia at the time, Romania. You need a visa for all of that, and for most of Africa, really most of it, even those you don't need today. For the Gulf, you needed a visa for the UAE as an Italian. For Jordan, even you needed a visa for Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia. You even need a visa for some Central American countries. It was more adventurous, but also you met people. You didn't get visas online. You had to get visas in person. And going to get a visa for Laos is also an opportunity to talk to people and say, hey, I'm going to Laos. Oh, you're a tourist. How old are you? I'm 17. Oh, wow, great. Where are you staying there? I have a friend there. Get in touch. So there was always a positive side to the planning that had to go into it, and to the adventurousness of it all.
Fantastic. And you referenced the record you set. As I said in the intro before, it was cool. So tell us the process of working with Guinness from 2004 to 2006 to get your name. And
yeah, I mean, it was actually pretty straightforward. And I've been in touch recently with I forgot his name again, but with two guys who they've broken the record. I mean, by all accounts, based on what they say, they have broken the record. Briefly broken it before someone else broke it. It looks like the process is quite cumbersome. At that time, it was just about showing the passport stamps, which makes sense. I mean, if you got a passport stamp from somewhere, it means you've been there. So I don't know why Guinness now is requiring videos, witness statements, and all that. It was just about passport stamps. I didn't have a passport stamp for the Vatican. I provided a photo. And by the way, I mean, I don't believe that going to the Golan should count as, I'm neutral, I'm not mentioning names, but going to the Golan should not count as having been to Syria. It's actually very sad. It is a part of Syria which is occupied. So, at that time, it was about passport stamps, which was simple. And also, you've been there when you've really been there. You cleared immigration. You went in. So.
Yeah. You thought you were going to stay away from politics, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that politics can actually divide people, and I think that when you're a traveler, you meet people who have ideas so different from yours, politically, socially, economically, and even when someone has ideas that you think are wrong, not only about politics. I mean, think about in terms of in some places you find people obviously very sexist, or you find places who, and you still have to talk to them. I mean, dialogue is what makes people better. And talking to someone who has views very different from yours, even if it doesn't change you, in some cases it shouldn't. Maybe if you're talking to someone whose views are in today's world objectively problematic, it might change the other person. So I believe in friendship. I believe in dialogue. Yeah. Okay. Maybe one last question. I have to go very soon, unfortunately.
I will ask. I studied your Twitter account as well. It sounds like you mentioned this country earlier, East Timor. You mentioned. Yeah. A leader I admire as well, Jose Ramos Horta, and tell us about East Timor in closing.
I loved it. I had the chance. My very first job was with Oxfam when I was 22, just out of university, or 23. And I studied in Oxford, so I was not very imaginative. So the first job I got was at Oxfam. And I was the project manager for a project in East Timor when it was still occupied by Indonesia. I had the chance to go to East Timor both when Indonesia was there, when the United Nations was administering, and then after independence. So it's a country that is very dear to my heart. I had the pleasure of meeting, and I'm still in touch on WhatsApp even, with Dr. Ramos Horta. I've met Shanana several times. I mean, wonderful people, wonderful little country. I just wish it was closer, and then I would be going more frequently. So. I'm afraid I have to go.
And we thank you for your time
Stefan,
today.
It was great being here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And any questions, follow-ups, people wanting to meet in Europe, whatever, I'll see you online.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.